Traditional cost accounting presents itself as an exact science. You map expected costs, track what you spend, and let arithmetic deliver a performance verdict. The most celebrated outcome in this system is the favorable variance. This occurs simply when your actual costs come in lower than your standard budgeted costs. You spent less than you planned. But strategic cost management forces us to look past the top-line number. We have to ask whether saving money in a specific instance actually aligns with the long-term strategy of the organization. Accepting a favorable variance at face value is a dangerous professional misconception. A positive number on a spreadsheet does not automatically equal operational success. Calculating the variance is merely a mathematical diagnostic. True management begins only when you investigate the physical reality behind the math. Consider the reimbursement model used by most hospitals. They operate on DRGs, or diagnostic-related groups. This is a standard framework that dictates how facilities are paid for specific medical cases. This diagram illustrates how every DRG carries a rigid standard for a patient's length of stay. Here, it's exactly 4 days. If discharged early, the hospital registers a favorable variance, consuming fewer resources. Conversely, a longer stay loses money, generating an adverse variance. Now weigh the ethical consequences of that favorable early discharge. It looks highly efficient on a variance report, but it could actually reflect insufficient medical treatment. The hospital might be rushing recoveries to save money. Alternatively, the early discharge might mean the patient healed exceptionally fast because they perfectly complied with health guidelines. The math looks identical in both scenarios. A favorable financial variance can easily mask deep ethical or quality control failures. A robust costing system must track qualitative data rather than relying strictly on quantitative outcomes. This friction isn't limited to healthcare. When we apply rigid financial standards to a standard corporate hierarchy, we trigger predictable psychological reactions. If standard costing is used top-down, strictly to evaluate employee performance, the workforce inevitably develops a negative perception of the entire analytical process. This negative perception breeds suboptimal behaviors, the most common being the creation of budget slack. Budget slack occurs when managers intentionally pad their time or cost estimates. By setting an artificially high baseline, they guarantee that their actual costs will produce a favorable variance for upper management. The second major consequence is short-termism. Employees begin prioritizing immediate, quantified results, like cutting preventative maintenance to save cash this quarter, at the expense of the organization's long-term strategic health. The primary method to neutralize these behaviors is participative budgeting. This requires bringing employees into the standard-setting process. When managers help set their own benchmarks, they understand the reasoning behind the numbers. This removes the perception that the evaluation procedure is systemically biased against them. Organizations must build their performance measurement around an extensive range of quantitative and qualitative measures. This broad approach encourages management to adopt a long-term view. Standard costing systems fail when they ignore human psychology. A standard only dictates behavior effectively if the employees believe that standard is fair. To prevent budget slack and ethical oversights, the variance report itself must be redesigned. It cannot be a passive, historical document. It must operate as an active management tool. The governing principle behind these modern reports is management by exception. Management by exception filters out all the expected routine results. It highlights only the essential cost deviations, directing executive attention exactly where the process is breaking down. A successful report requires 5 specific elements. First, it must clearly state what the baseline cost performance should have been. Second, it must show exactly how close the actual cost is to that expected standard performance. Third, it must explicitly provide an analysis of the root causes behind the variance. This prevents the face value assumptions we saw in the DRG hospital example. Fourth, it must state the exact mathematical magnitude of the variance. And fifth, it must be generated promptly. A report is useless if it arrives too late for managers to intervene. The reporting system only identifies the leak. The ultimate responsibility for taking the necessary steps to stop the reoccurrence of adverse variances lies with the executives. A variance report has no structural value if it only looks backward at what was spent. Its true function is to direct executive action forward. To understand the limits of standard costing, we have to look at its origins in early 20th century mass production. The methodology was built for this environment: predictable, repetitive manufacturing, where identical products were assembled primarily through manual labor. But if you attempt to apply those historical accounting principles to a highly complex, modern production environment, the math immediately begins to break down. We can identify 6 friction points. First, customization. Modern products aren't standardized, so historical baseline costs quickly lose relevance. Second, rapid obsolescence. Because product life cycles are short, preset standard costs decay, becoming outdated before the quarter even ends. Third, automation. Production today is highly automated. This shifts expenditures away from direct labor and into complex overhead categories. Fourth, ideal standards. Modern environments often reject current achievable standards in favor of theoretical, ideal perfection metrics. Fifth, continuous improvement. Philosophies like Kaizen mean the efficiency target is always moving upward, actively working against fixed standards. Sixth, the information lag. Traditional variance reports lack granular detail, arriving too late to solve problems in real-time systems. Standard costing remains a foundational accounting tool, but forcing it unchanged into a highly automated, continuous improvement facility guarantees that your strategic data will be distorted.